The night sky tore apart with fire as the ship plunged through the clouds, metal screaming against the pull of gravity. Inside the wreck, alarms blared and sparks filled the air, the sound almost drowning out the sharp breaths of the alien soldier. Strapped to her seat, she pressed a trembling hand against her side, feeling blood soak through her uniform. The impact had thrown her across the cabin, and the wound burned, as if the planet itself had reached in to claim her. The stars vanished. Behind thick storm clouds, and with one final groan of metal, the ship struck the ground like thunder. The world turned upside down, and then there was silence broken only by the hiss of burning fuel and the steady drip of blood hitting the floor. Smoke filled her lungs as she pulled herself free from the wreckage, coughing, stumbling into the dark night. The jungle around her was alive with sounds she didn't recognize, low growls, wings beating in the distance, the crack of branches under heavy movement. The air smelled of ash and wet soil, thick with danger. Her head spun and her legs trembled, but she forced herself forward, clutching the wound on her side. Her unit was gone. The last transmission she had heard before the crash was filled with screams and static. She was alone on a hostile planet, wounded and hunted. Every instinct told her she would not survive the night. She fell against a broken tree trunk, her vision blurring. The shadows of the forest seemed to move on their own, eyes glowing faintly in the distance, watching, waiting. Somewhere deep in the dark, something roared, a deep guttural sound that shook the leaves from the trees. She tightened her grip. On the small blade still strapped to her thigh, it was laughable protection, but it was all she had left. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her chest ached. This was the end, she thought. She had escaped the crash, but she would not escape what came next. Then, through the smoke and flickering firelight, a figure appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with caution, yet with strange confidence. The silhouette carried a weapon long, metallic, deadly. Her heart seized in fear. At first she thought it was another soldier sent to finish her, one of the enemy scouts who had chased her fleet through this sector. But when the figure stepped closer, the flames lit his face. Eyes widened. A human. She had heard of them, whispered stories of their brutality in war, their refusal to surrender, of how they fought like predators from some ancient age. And now, one stood before her, looking down at her with sharp, piercing eyes. He said nothing. At first, his weapon stayed lowered, but his posture was tense, every muscle ready to strike. She tried to raise her blade, but her hand shook too badly, and her knees buckled beneath her weight. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if torn between finishing her off or walking away. Her lips trembled, and for the first time in years, fear overcame the mask of discipline she wore as a soldier. She whispered something in her own tongue, a broken plea that dissolved into coughs. The human crouched in front of her, still silent, his weapon slung across his chest. His eyes scanned the wound at her side, the blood, the way her hands were slipping as she tried to hold herself together. He frowned, not with anger, but something that looked like thought, like conflict. He muttered something under his breath, words she could not understand. But his voice was low, almost calm, nothing like the cold threats she expected. The jungle stirred again, another roar echoing in the distance. The human looked up sharply, his head turning toward the shadows. The sound was closer now, heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Predators were circling the wreck. He looked back at her, then at the firelit jungle beyond, and she realized in that moment he had a choice. Leave her here, broken and helpless, to be torn apart by the beasts, or risk himself by dragging her into safety. She could see the calculation. In his eyes, she expected him to walk away. Why wouldn't he? She was nothing to him. Where she was the enemy. But then, with a sudden decision, he reached out and pulled her arm over his shoulder. She gasped in pain, too weak to fight back, lifted her with surprising strength, steadying her weight against him. His jaw was set, his expression hard, but his actions betrayed something she did not understand. He was not leaving her. He was carrying her away from the wreck, away from the death that stalked them both in the dark. The ground trembled as the beasts broke. Through the smoke, their eyes glowed, teeth catching the light of the burning wreckage. The human tightened his grip on her, raised his weapon with his free hand, and without hesitation fired into the shadows. The air cracked with the sound, bright flashes lighting up the trees as monstrous shapes fell back into the night.
Oh.
The alien soldier pressed her head against his shoulder, her body weak, her vision swimming. She did not know why he fought for her. She did not know why he chose to carry her instead of leaving her to die. But as the thunder of his weapon echoed through the jungle and the predators howled in retreat, she realized one truth: the human had refused to abandon her. The jungle swallowed them whole as the human dragged her away from the burning wreckage, each step a battle against the uneven ground. The alien soldier's body hung heavy against him, her blood dripping onto the forest floor, leaving a trail too easy to follow. The firelight faded behind them, and with it came silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the growl of unseen predators. He knew they weren't safe. The wreck would draw attentions, scavengers, beasts, maybe even soldiers hunting for survivors. He moved faster, his jaw clenched, every muscle in his body straining to keep them both alive. She tried to speak, words trembling from her lips in her own language, but her voice cracked under the weight of exhaustion. He shot her a quick look, his eyes narrowing as if trying to understand, but he shook his head. "Quiet," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. The tone alone told her enough any noise could kill them both. She bit down on her pain and forced herself into silence, though her breathing still came in short, harsh gasps. The wound was deep. She felt the heat of her blood soaking into his clothing. Every minute mattered, or she would bleed out before they found cover. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, the human pushed into a rocky hollow, hidden behind thick vines. It was a natural shelter, a shallow cave, that blocked the view from the open jungle. He lowered her carefully against the stone wall, her body trembling, her eyes glassy with pain. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing hard, weapon in hand, watching the jungle outside. Then he turned back to her, crouched down, and without a word, began tearing fabric from his own sleeve. Her eyes widened when he pressed the cloth against her wound. Pressure burned like fire, and she let out a weak cry before biting down on it. His expression didn't soften. He worked quickly, his movements rough but purposeful, tying the makeshift bandage tight enough to slow the bleeding. She studied him through the haze of pain, the way his eyes stayed sharp, scanning her face, her wound, then the shadows outside. This was no ordinary man. His discipline, his silence, the scars on his hands all spoke of a soldier. When he finished, he sat back on his heels, resting his rifle across his knees. For a moment, their eyes locked, and in that silence, she saw the wall between them. He was human. Her people's stories called them dangerous, ruthless, unwilling to bow to anyone. She was an alien soldier, raised to see his kind as enemies. And yet here they were, two strangers pressed together by fate, bleeding and hunted in a hostile world. She tried again to speak, her voice weak but determined. She pointed at herself, whispered her name, broken syllables carried on shallow breaths. He stared at her for a long second, then finally nodded. Slowly, he tapped his chest with 2 fingers. "Cole." His voice was deep, steady, like stone against steel. Cole, that was his name. It echoed in her mind, a sound strange but clear. The silence stretched. The jungle outside growled again, a chilling reminder that predators stalked the night. Cole glanced toward the entrance of the hollow, his grip tightening on his weapon. Then, without looking at her, he spoke again. His words were low, firm, edged with warning. Though she couldn't understand the language, his tone was unmistakable. He didn't trust her. He didn't want her slowing him down, and yet he hadn't left her. He could have walked away back at the wreck, but he hadn't. He had chosen to carry her. She knew enough about survival to understand what that meant. He was trapped in this alliance just as she was. Alone they would both die. Together, maybe. They stood a chance. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Cole kept watch, eyes never closing, his body still even in exhaustion. She drifted in and out of sleep, pain pulling her back each time, her thoughts circling one question: why? Why would a human of all beings refuse to abandon her? She had no answer. All she knew was that when her enemies came hunting, and when the beasts crept closer in the dark, her survival would depend not on her own strength, but on the man who sat guard with fire in his eyes and steel in his hands. Outside, the jungle shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a voice called out, sharp and metallic, carried on the wind. It was not an animal. It was not the storm. It was soldiers, searching. Cole heard it too. His posture stiffened, his rifle rising as he peered into the night. He looked back at her, and in that moment, no words were needed. The enemy was close. The fragile alliance between human and alien was about to be tested by fire. The voices grew louder in the jungle, sharp and mechanical, cutting through the steady hum of insects and the whisper of leaves in the wind. The alien soldier's heart hammered in her chest as she recognized the sound her enemies search. Drones sweeping through the night. Their lights flickered in the distance like angry stars, beams cutting across the trees, searching for movement, for heat, for her. If they found her alive, they would finish what the crash had failed to do. Cole was already moving, his body low to the ground, his rifle steady in his hands. He glanced back at her, his eyes narrowing with calculation. She could barely move, pain pressing her down against the rock, but she knew what his stare meant. If she stayed here, if she made a sound, if she slowed him down, they would both be dead. He motioned for her to stay silent, one finger pressed against his lips, then slid toward the mouth of the hollow like a shadow. His steps were silent, each one placed with the precision of a man who had lived his life avoiding death. Through the vines, she saw the glow of machines, the faint outlines of armored soldiers moving with them. Their weapons caught the moonlight, cold and merciless. Her breath caught in her throat. They were closer than she thought, too close. The blood trail she had left behind at the crash site would lead them right to her. She pressed a hand against her bandaged wound, as if willing it to stop bleeding, as if her fear alone could erase the trail that betrayed her. Cole watched them with a soldier's stillness, his rifle raised but unmoving. He wasn't afraid. She realized he was calculating. His eyes followed their patterns, their spacing, the way they swept the jungle. He knew how to fight them, but he also knew the cost. Single shot, and they'd all come crashing down on their position. He looked back at her, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something like frustration in his face. Not at her, but at the situation. He could slip away, vanish into the jungle, survive on his own. But with her bleeding, broken, barely able to stand, he was chained to her fate. Her lips trembled as she whispered his name. Cole, it was all she could manage, his name rough and broken on her tongue. He glanced back again, and though his face was hard as stone, she thought she saw something shift in his eyes. He didn't move. He didn't abandon her. He crawled back to her side, his voice low, almost a growl. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. They were leaving.
Ow.
He pulled her up, her body a weight he bore without complaint, though she felt how much effort it cost him. Each step was torture, her wound tearing open with every movement. But his arm locked tight around her, steady and unshakable. They moved deeper into the jungle, away from the lights, into shadows, so thick even the moon could not follow. Behind them, the soldiers spread out, scanning, tracking. Their voices clipped and cold. The jungle became a labyrinth of twisted roots and hanging vines. Strange creatures shrieked in the distance, startled by the invaders. Cole moved quickly but carefully, weaving between the trees, using the land itself to hide their trail. She realized he wasn't just strong, he was skilled, trained, experienced in surviving hunts like this. For the first time, a flicker of hope cut through her fear, but hope was fragile. The sound of footsteps grew closer, the snap of branches under heavy boots echoing through the night. A beam of light cut across their path, sweeping dangerously. Close, Cole froze, pressing her against the trunk of a massive tree, his body shielding hers completely. She could feel his heart pounding, steady and fierce, like a war drum. His breath brushed against her ear as he whispered something she couldn't understand. But the calm in his tone steadied her shaking hands. The light passed. The soldiers moved on. For now, hours bled into each other as they crept through the dark, always one step ahead of the hunters, always on the edge of discovery. Her body screamed for rest, but Cole never stopped. He carried her when she faltered, his jaw set, his eyes scanning constantly. The jungle itself seemed to fight against them, storms breaking overhead, rain soaking their bodies, mud dragging at their feet, but the hunters never relented. Their voices echoed again and again, promising death, closing the circle tighter. With every passing hour, by the time they reached the cliffs, she was barely conscious. The storm had passed, leaving the world drowned in mist. Cole set her down gently against the rocks, his breath heavy, his rifle still clutched in his hands. She blinked through the haze of exhaustion and saw movement below soldiers. Dozens of them, sweeping the valley, their machines scanning every shadow. She looked at him, her lips trembling with words she couldn't form. Wanted to tell him, to leave her, to save himself, to do what logic demanded. But even in her broken state, she knew the truth before she spoke it. He wouldn't. He couldn't. She had seen it in the way he had carried her, the way he had fought back the beasts, the way he had refused again and again to abandon her. The hunters were closing in. Cole, a lone human soldier on a hostile world, was about to face an army not for himself, but for her. The mist clung to the cliffs like a heavy shroud, hiding the valley below in gray silence. Cole pressed his back against the stone, his rifle steady in his hands, eyes sharp as he scanned the shapes, moving in the fog. The enemy soldiers moved. Like hunters, their search pattern precise, their weapons drawn. One wrong step, one sound too loud, and both he and the wounded alien at his side would be dead before they could even run. He crouched lower, his breath slow, his body still as stone. Beside him, the alien soldier stirred. Her eyes flickered open, weak but alert, her face pale from blood loss. For a long time she had been too exhausted to speak, her strength stolen by the wound that refused to close. But now, as the storm cleared and the danger pressed in tighter, she forced herself upright. She whispered something in her own tongue, her voice soft but urgent. Cole looked at her, confusion crossing his face. She tried again, struggling with the words, until finally, broken fragments of his language fell from her lips. Not just. Soldier, she said, her accent sharp, the words jagged like stones, her eyes burned with desperation. They hunt me because of who I am. She pressed her hand to her chest, her trembling fingers clenching into her uniform. Blood. My father. High command. If they take me, war will change. Her words faltered and she coughed, blood staining her lips, but she forced herself to continue. I am target. Not accident. Not random. They want me. Alive. The silence between them deepened, heavier than the mist. Cole's jaw tightened. As the truth sank in, she wasn't just a wounded soldier he had pulled from the wreckage. She was something far more dangerous, someone whose capture could shift the balance of power in the war. He had risked everything to carry her through the jungle, fought beasts and slipped past patrols, not realizing the weight of the life he held in his arms. Saving her didn't just mean saving a stranger, it meant taking a side in a war he had walked away from long ago. Her eyes searched his face wide with something like fear. You understand? If I fall, if they take me? Her voice broke, the words lost in pain. She didn't need to finish. He understood well enough. If her enemies captured her, they would use her bloodline, her name, her life as a weapon to shatter entire worlds. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. His gaze drifted to the valley below, to the endless line of soldiers sweeping the fog. Their machines humming, their lights slicing through the gray. He could leave her here, could slip into the mist, vanish like smoke, and let fate claim. Her, it would be easier, smarter. Survival meant cutting ties, not chaining himself to someone hunted by an army. And yet, his grip on his rifle only tightened. He remembered the look on her face when he had first pulled her from the wreck, the fear, the pain, the certainty of death. Remembered the way she had whispered his name, broken but clinging to him, as if he were the only solid ground left. In a world falling apart, now even knowing who she was, even knowing the risk, something inside him refused to turn away. She seemed to see it in his eyes. Her breath caught, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The silence. Stretched again, broken only by the distant hum of machines. Finally, Cole leaned closer, his voice a low growl, his words rough but clear. "Then we don't let them take you." Her eyes widened. She stared at him as if she had misheard, as if the idea itself was madness. But there was no hesitation in his tone, no weakness in his stare. He had made his choice, before she could. Respond. The mist below shifted. Lights moved closer, voices calling out in sharp commands. Cole snapped his attention back to the valley, his soldier's instincts sharpening. They were running out of time. He scanned the cliffside, calculating. Routes, cover, traps he could use. His mind moved fast, every detail etched into memory. Every possibility weighed. She pressed her hand against his arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakness. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why you?" "Not leave." "Me. I am enemy." For the first time since she had met him, something like a smile flickered across his face, not soft. It's not gentle, but sharp, tired and defiant. "Because I don't leave people behind." His words were simple, but they struck harder than any blade. The sound of boots echoed closer. The search was tightening, the enemy drawing near the cliffs. Cole rose to his feet, pulling her up with him, steadying her as she leaned heavily against him. His rifle was ready, his eyes burning with the promise of a fight. She didn't understand humans. She had been raised on stories of their savagery, their brutality, their refusal to bow. And yet here, in the shadows of a hostile world, one human had chosen to protect her not for glory, not for gain, but because he refused to abandon her. And his fear curled tight in her chest. She felt something new stir inside her, something dangerously close to trust. The hunt was over. The enemy knew. They were here. And together, they would have to face what came next. The night broke apart with the sound of voices shouting through the mist, commands carrying across the cliffs, boots striking the stone with mechanical rhythm. Lights swept over the rocks, beams slicing through the fog as enemy soldiers climbed. Higher, their search tightening like a noose. Cole pressed the alien soldier against the wall of the cliffside, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning every shadow. His muscles were taut, every nerve ready to fire. He had faced hunts before, ambushes, traps, firefights, in forgotten worlds. But this was different. He wasn't fighting for survival alone, he was fighting for her. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling against his side. Blood soaked through the cloth he had tied around her wound, and her skin was pale, but her eyes burned with something. Fierce. She clutched her blade with a weak hand, though she knew it was useless against what approached. Her lips parted as if to speak, but Cole's hand pressed against her shoulder, steady, firm. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice low and sharp. His gaze never left the mist below. They had nowhere left to run. The cliffs rose steep behind them, jagged and impossible to climb in her condition. The valley below swarmed with soldiers, their drones buzzing like insects, their beams sweeping wider. If they stayed still, they would be found. If they ran, they would be cut down. There was only one choice left: fight. Cole's mind worked quickly, mapping every detail of the terrain. The cliff walls curved inward, creating a natural choke point. Boulders hung loose on the higher ledges, ready to fall with the right push. Old ruins jutted from the stone, remnants of some long-forgotten structure, their pillars cracked and leaning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the enemy bleed before they reached him. He pulled her down behind one of the broken walls, his voice low but steady. She didn't understand all his words, but the meaning was clear. Hold. Wait. Fight when the time comes. She nodded, her breath ragged, her body shaking, but her eyes locked on his with determination. Whatever happened, she would not face it. Alone, the first soldier appeared through the fog, his armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight, his rifle raised. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger, and the silence shattered with a burst of fire. The soldier dropped instantly, his body vanishing into the mist. The jungle erupted in sound shouts, the crack of weapons, beams of light converging on their position. The hunt was over. The battle had begun. Cole moved like a machine, his body honed by years of combat, every shot precise, every movement deliberate. He fired, shifted, reloaded, fired again, never staying in the same place, never giving the enemy a clear target. Bullets sparked off the stone around them, beams of light carving the mist. But he stood firm, dragging her with him from cover to cover. She clutched her blade, her other hand pressed tight against her wound, forcing herself to stay awake too. Stay present, to fight in whatever way she could. The enemy pressed harder. Their numbers too many, their discipline too sharp. Cole pulled a grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and hurled it into the mist. The explosion shook the cliffs, a wall of fire and stone tearing through the soldiers. Boulders tumbled from above, crushing those who had climbed too high. Screams echoed in the night, and for a moment the valley was chaos, but still they came. More soldiers rose through the fog, their armor black against the firelight, their weapons spitting death. Cole's rifle overheated, the barrel glowing red, and he tossed it aside, drawing his sidearm with practiced ease. His face was grim, sweat dripping from his brow, his breath sharp and controlled. He was a wall against the storm, and still they came. The alien soldier gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright, her legs trembling beneath her. She leaned against the cracked pillar, her blade clenched tight. A soldier lunged through the mist, his weapon raised, and with the last of her strength she drove the blade upward, catching him beneath the armor. He fell with a cry, and she collapsed. Against the stone, her chest heaving, Cole glanced back at her, his eyes flashing with something fierce respect. The battle raged on, the night lit with fire and blood. For every enemy that fell, 2 more took their place. Cole's movements grew slower, his ammunition dwindling. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with defiance. But he knew the truth they could not hold forever. The cliffs were soaked with smoke, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and flesh. The soldiers closed in tighter, their shouts rising above the thunder of battle. And then, as Cole slammed his last magazine into his weapon, as the alien soldier raised her blade with shaking hands, the sky split open. A roar filled the night, not of beasts, not of soldiers, but of vengeance. Lights burned through the mist, cutting down from the heavens like the eyes of gods. A fleet was descending, massive warships blotting out the stars, their shadows swallowing the valley below. Cole froze, his rifle still raised. The alien soldier's eyes widened, tears mixing with blood on her face. She knew those ships. She knew the crest painted on their hulls. Her people, her father's fleet. They had come for her. The soldiers below faltered, their voices breaking. In panic, the hunt was over, the battle lost. The fleet had arrived, and with it came firepower no ground force could withstand. Cole lowered his weapon slowly, his chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion. Beside him, she collapsed to her knees, her strength finally gone, but her eyes never leaving his. He had fought for her, bled for her, refused to abandon her. And now, as her people's fleet descended like thunder from the stars, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: without him, she would never have survived long enough to see this moment. The last stand had bought them the dawn. The ground shook as the fleet descended, engines screaming like storms tearing the sky apart. Light spread across the cliffs, drowning the jungle in brilliance, casting the enemy soldiers into sharp silhouettes. Their voices broke into panic, orders shouted and shattered by fear. The predators of the valley fled into the dark, terrified by the power raining from above. The hunt had ended not by blade, not by rifle, but by the arrival of a force that could not be challenged. Cole stood at the edge of the cliff, his weapon lowered but his body still braced for a fight. Smoke curled from the rocks around him. His chest heaving with the strain of battle, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. He had nothing left, no ammunition, no strength, but still he stood tall, a soldier to the last moment. Beside him, the alien woman leaned against the crumbling stone, her body broken, her uniform stained with blood, yet her eyes burned as she watched the ships split the clouds, ships bearing the crest of her people. The mark of the empire her father commanded, the enemy soldiers scattered, some throwing down their weapons, others running blindly into the jungle. A beam of searing light lanced down from the sky, obliterating those who tried to fight back. The air was filled with the crackle of cums, the thunder of drop pods punching into the ground. And then, through the smoke, her people emerged, warriors in gleaming suits, their banners bright against the night. Their formation was precise, their discipline unbroken, and their arrival swept across the battlefield like a tide reclaiming the shore. One of them rushed to her side, his voice breaking into her language, calling her title. She answered weakly, her head bowing for a moment before she caught herself. Her people's eyes widened as they realized who she was, the daughter of their commander, alive against all odds. Shouts of relief and pride spread among them, their voices rising like a chorus. But as they reached for her, their hands pulling to lift her onto a stretcher, she shook her head. Her gaze shifted, not to the warriors clad in shining armor, but to the human who stood silent beside her. Cole said nothing. His rifle hung loose in his hand, his expression unreadable. Looked at the soldiers gathering around them, then at her, then back toward the jungle where the last of the enemy had fled. His eyes were hard, calculating. This wasn't his war. These weren't his people. He had done what he set out to do. He had kept her alive. Now the time had come for him to walk away, to vanish into the wilderness before the weight of politics, titles, and fleets came crashing down upon him. But as he turned, she reached for him. Her hand, trembling and blood-stained, caught his arm. With surprising strength, "No," she whispered, her voice raw. The words shook more than the thunder of the ships above. "You stay." Her people froze, their eyes narrowing at the human. Some raised their weapons, their instincts screaming that he was the enemy, the one who had no place here. But she would not release him. Her eyes burned with defiance as she pulled herself upright, her body trembling but her voice fierce. "He saved me," she told them in her own tongue, her words sharp enough to cut stone. "Without him, I would be gone. I live because he refused to leave me." The soldiers hesitated, glancing at one another, uncertain. Their orders had been clear: recover her at all costs. Nothing had been said about the human. Cole stood unmoving, his jaw set, his silence unbroken. He expected them to drag him away, to brand him prisoner, perhaps even executioner's prize. But before they could act, her voice cut the air again, stronger than before. "He comes with me." The words struck like a blade. Her people straightened, their discipline holding them back from protest, but their eyes revealed their confusion. A human walking among them was unthinkable, dangerous. Yet none dared argue not when her bloodline was command, not when her survival was miracle. Cole looked at her then, truly looked, his eyes searching hers. He had not asked for this. He had not saved her for glory, for reward, or for place among her kind. He had done it because he could not leave her. And now she was binding him to her future with chains stronger than iron. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the fleet overhead. Finally, he nodded. Not with joy, not with fear, but with the acceptance of a soldier who had made his choice long ago. He would not abandon her. Not now. Not ever. As the stretcher lifted her, she reached for his hand, her grip weak but unyielding, walked beside her as the soldiers carried her toward the waiting dropship, the mist parting beneath the roar of engines. Behind them, the cliff still burned, the ruins of their battle left behind. Ahead, the fleet waited, and with it, a future neither of them could yet see. The human and the alien enemies by blood, bound by survival, stepped into the unknown together. And as the ship's ramp closed, sealing them inside the light, one truth remained unshaken. She had been wounded and alone, but she had met the one human who refused to abandon her.